Mr. Derek Veenhoff. He's better known as Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Deekast. I'm your host, Deekatello, and today I'm here with Lorenzo of the Psychedelic Salon. Welcome, Lorenzo.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, very excited to talk to you today. We just spoke a little bit briefly here, and we were just saying that you were part of the lost generation before the boomers. And why did they call it the lost generation?
Actually, I think it actually goes back into the 30s and all the people that went over to Paris and all that. I was at the very end of it. You know, I was born in 42 and the baby boomers started in 45, 46, something like that. So I'm not quite sure why. Just some people have told me that. And I said, well, you know, I've been stumbling around kind of lost for a long time. And, you know, I've taken the same trajectory you did. I just took longer to do it. You're on speed dial for going through some of these things.
Yeah, I guess that's the nature of my generation, the millennials, is we are kind of on a sped up version of what happened before us, you know, with this technology and all that. Yeah,
you don't really have a choice, you know, that when I grew up, you know, before there was television, over half the country didn't even have television. And I was like 10, 11 years old when we got television. So I didn't even have a TV generation. I grew up in the radio generation. And believe it or not, our family would sit around in the evenings and listening to one or two radio programs, you know, Fibber McGee and Molly and some of those things. And you know, that it was a family affair to listen to the radio. And we'd all have to be kind of quiet. And it's only recently I realized that we used our imaginations a lot more because, you know, when they did the radio, you had to, you know, picture it in your mind. But, you know, we never talked about that. However, I do realize that when we got older and then some of these radio shows came on television, we didn't like them. We didn't watch them. And I'm now thinking it's probably because we all have different images of what the people look like, what their houses look like. But imagination was a really big thing. You know, radio is considered the theater of the mind. And that's why I like podcasting. You know, it takes me back to those old days there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's almost like the analogy people talk about reading books versus the movies nowadays, right? Where people kind of enjoy books most often because they can imagine these things in their own way. But as you say that, I think maybe almost myself, I feel like as a kid, I don't know if that's just a kid versus adult thing, but I almost use my imagination a little more, where now I've got video game plays stuck in my head and songs all the time. Like, it's just the media has infiltrated my brain such that it's hard sometimes to use my own imagination almost.
Yeah, you know, I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just what is. And we have to, you know, recognize what's going on.
Yeah. So can we give people a bit about your background? We'll just mention off the top that we mentioned the Psychedelic Salon is your podcast. You cover a wide range of topics there, and you've been doing it for a long time. You talk a lot about guys like Terrence McKenna. I think you've interviewed Ram Dass, different figures like that. And you often talk about the war on drugs and that kind of thing. And I hope to get into all of that. But could you give people sort of your backstory? I know you've got like a rich history, you know, so I've heard.
Yeah, actually, you know, that I do the Psychedelic Salon and almost all my friends that I know are psychedelic. But I was 42 years old before I had my first experience other than alcohol and caffeine and nicotine. You know, I was in that generation where, you know, I was actually living in San Francisco the day of the be-in. I was with the Navy at the time and had a wife and a 3-year-old son. And we were at Golden Gate Park that morning. And I didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden, the park was different. We used to go there every Sunday morning. And all of a sudden, all these hippies were there. And so we didn't stay around, but I was on the straight and narrow then and thought, you know, Timothy Leary is just ruining people's lives and all. And so that's been a long progression. So, you know, I was an electrical engineer as an undergraduate, and I got a dream job teaching sailing at Houston Yacht Club in the summer. So wound up getting a doctorate of jurisprudence degree at University of Houston. And yeah, I had a deferment and everything like that. But then I got an offer to sail on a square rig ship across the Pacific in an old three-masted wooden square rigger. So I took that job, and of course lost my deferment, wound up in the Navy, and basically spent the 60s in college and bumming around Europe and the Pacific for a year, and then then Vietnam and another big mission. So I got out of the Navy, went to finish law school, started practicing law, and I hated it. I didn't like practicing law, so I got into the computer business. I started one of the first personal computer businesses, and we had over 3,000 representatives in 17 states, and we were doing great. And then IBM decided they were going to get into business, and they just wiped us out like a bug,
Dang, yeah.
But at the final days of my computer business was in the 80s in Dallas. And long story short, a friend of mine turned me on to MDMA, ecstasy, and I wound up going to the Start Club. And to keep my computer company afloat, I started selling drugs. It was legal then. When I started MDMA, I would never even have tried MDMA if it had been illegal. I was a straight and narrow. I was a lawyer in Texas where people were getting 30 years to life for one joint. It's just not the thing I was going to do. Well, then I got MDMA. I went to the Start Club, and I started selling it to pay the cash flow in my computer company. Long story short, I wound up moving to Florida because things were getting kind of dicey when they made it illegal. Computer company crashed. So I went down, became a tech writer, worked as a legal assistant because I didn't have a law license in Florida. And I eventually wound up becoming the internet evangelist for Verizon. And I got to travel all over the world, touting the internet. This is in the early 90s when it was all dial up and stuff like that. So I was involved in the .com bubble and all like that. And long story short, it was in the summer of, I don't know what it was. Must have been the summer of 98. I was reading this brochure. I had some vacation, and this guy named Terrence McKenna was giving a lecture at Omega Institute. So I decided, hey, I'll go up there because I'd heard of McKenna through Omni or Mondo 2000, the magazine Mondo 2000. Had this thing. By then, I'd been doing mushrooms, and my friend had mushrooms grown in his farm out of town, and we did acid and stuff like that. But it was all low key, and I'd never even heard of DMT till I read this article in Mondo. It's in the mid 90s. Long story short, I went to Omega Institute, met Terrence McKenna, and he told me about this thing going on in Palenque in January. And so I wound up in Palenque in January, and by June I had taken a leave of absence and moved to the West Coast, and here I am.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a crazy life story. A lot going on. When you met Terrence, for example, at that time, did it still feel like very much in sort of underground club feel, like, because we hadn't had the YouTube and that kind of explosion yet? So did it still feel like you're on the verge of something really interesting there, and there's sort of a almost exclusive club?
It was different from exclusive. It was kind of scary, because when I started the Psychedelic Salon podcast, it was in March of 2005. Podcasting was only a few months old. And I almost didn't call it the Psychedelic Salon because the word psychedelic was so toxic at that time, and I got my courage. Actually, I talked to Terrence McKenna and Sasha Shulgin both about it. And they said the more public you get, the less scrutiny you'll get, but people don't want to give you any publicity. And so just be out there. Don't worry about it. As long as you're not, buying and selling and stuff like that. And since I'm a lawyer, I know about the statute of limitations. So I gave an extensive interview about my drug dealing days. It's on the front page of my website. And, but the statute of limitations have passed and all those things. And I'm confident about things like that. So I didn't worry about it. But it's very different today because, we can have this conversation even. And back then, going to Palenque, which was down in the Chiapas and that in Mexico, down by the Yucatan Peninsula, that was at a time when there was all the uprising down the Chiapas. There were the peasant revolt down there. And then here we're going down. I got a buddy at work to go down with me, and we're going down to the Chiapas to do a drug conference. And it was scary. I mean, we were really frightened, and we got down there. It was just crazy to be frightened because this is like the fourth or fifth year they'd done it, and at the last morning of the conference, you get around the pool, everybody's there, and Sasha Shulgin pulls out this letter. He says, "I just got this telegram," and he reads this dire telegram. The DEA knows we're down there, and they're going to be checking us coming back, and everybody's starting to panic. And then the people who've been there before start laughing because he does the same thing every year. He did the same thing every year. So it was interesting because people would bring drugs to the conference. You could bring drugs into Mexico pretty easily. You just didn't want to bring anything home. And so those conferences in Palenque, that's what really launched me, is that conference. I knew I wanted to be more involved with these people, and it was sort of like the Start Club on steroids,
Yeah. So how have you seen things change, or how have your expectations been vindicated or shattered now that you see? Because we feel like there's, in some sense, an explosion of psychedelic use and acceptance in America, and I guess worldwide too. But there's still less than 1%, I think, say, of Americans use, let's say, LSD once a year. So it's very, and the NIH, I believe, still says it's an addictive substance, although the science kind of shows the opposite of that, as well as the experience of the users. We know that that's not necessarily the case. I mean, so to make a long question there short, how have your expectations either come to fruition or not? Like, how do you?
I never expected anything close to what's going on right now. I figured I'd still be in the underground right now, and things have changed. I'll give you an example of how things have changed for a lot of people. When that first year in Palenque, Paul Stamets was one of the presenters down there. And after that, he stopped going to psychedelic conferences because all of his work with the U.S. Army, he developed a strain of mushrooms that detoxifies mustard gas and things like that. And he was doing all of this high-level defense work. So he really couldn't be associated with psychedelics and all. And last time I saw him was like, I guess now 2 years ago up at Orcas Island. And he gave, psychedelic talks, and he's talking about mushrooms freely and stuff like that. And so that's a huge change, because he's become very prominent, of course, by now. And so he feels freely to talk about it. The first big psilocybin study, end-of-life study, is one that Dr. Charlie Grove did at UCLA. And it took him 7 years to get approval for that study. And I'm really familiar with it because my wife was a research assistant on the study when it began. And it took forever to get approval. And now you see Harvard is back doing research again. Johns Hopkins is one of the leaders. UCLA is doing it all over the world. And actually in the US is where the least amount of the research is being done. There's a lot of research being done in Switzerland, Israel, places like that. So again, I don't think even 1% of the people using LSD is amazing, and that's probably enough to really keep things going. When the rites of Eleusis were going on 3,000 years ago, they said no more than 10-15% of the people throughout history ever even participated in it, and that really brought Western civilization to the fore. So you don't need a whole lot of people to kind of break out, and that's what they really do, is they break the barriers somewhat and get you thinking. I've gone the same route. I've been to a whole bunch of different religions, and now I'm like a friend of Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley had a friend who didn't believe in life after death, and the same didn't have all of those beliefs. And Aldous said, "Well, let's say you die, and all of a sudden you find you got an afterlife. What are you going to think?" He says, "I'm going to be really irritated."
Well, it's going to be, like, if does it last forever? It'd be a little boring and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you know, the older I get, the less I'm interested in an afterlife. You know, I'm trying to wrap this one up. I have so many things I want to do yet.
Yeah, I mean, that feeling of going to bed at the end of a tired day is kind of a great feeling, and I suppose the actual moment of death can be arduous, but the concept behind it, sort of going to sleep after a long tired day, is kind of appealing, to be honest. I don't know.
Well, you know, my father died of he had prostate cancer that migrated to the bone, and I was alone with him and holding his hand when he died. And he'd been in a great deal of pain. The morphine wasn't working very well anymore, and he'd been in a great deal of pain. And I was holding his hand, and all of a sudden he just relaxed. His features relaxed and smiled. It was not a horrible death at all. It was just he was just relaxed. He was at peace again. So I'm not concerned about that at all. That you know, what happens is going to happen, and
Yeah,
it's not going to last long.
right. And I think death that mostly scares us because oftentimes, or at least what we think of as death, can be, you know, a terrible accident or something sudden, like things like that involve pain. Whereas I'm not sure the percentage, but there are a lot of deaths that are, you know, in your sleep or just after old age, and sort of in that natural cycle of life thing.
Yeah, I was much more concerned about it when I was your age, quite frankly, and when I was in my 40s was when I really got concerned. You know, I started doing all kinds of vitamins and stuff like that, and now, you know, I exercise. I walk a couple miles every day, and I do some strength things and all, and I have a good diet. I do all my own cooking, so you know, it's not like I want to go anywhere or do anything, but I have several books I'm in the process. I've got one I'm going to finish in August, and I've got a couple more coming out. And I got some stuff I want to say. I realize not many people are going to hear it. Not going many people are going to read it. But I did a couple things that I like the sailing trip to Hawaii in a square rig sailing ship. You know, it was with Alan Villiers, who was he was at the time the most prominent old sea captain still alive, and it was his last voyage. And I actually took a whole bunch of slides. So I didn't know what to do with them, you know, because, you know, I've shown them and stuff like that. But it was, to me, it was an important thing. I'm going to turn them into NFTs and, you know, and put them out on the blockchain. And you can put things on the blockchain that are going to be self-perpetuating so that the NFTs will pay for the storage on the IPFS blockchain. So I've got a couple things like my cruise will research for the lost submarine Scorpion. I'm going to do that one too. And those stories will stay alive more than a book, because, you know, the books, you know, I've got all my books available for free in PDF format right now, but that only means 100 or so are going to be read.
Yeah, so, right.
But with the NFTs, if somebody's trading, you make a trading card. And, you know, I've got some. So I used to be a marketing guy, so I'm going to. I want to keep the stories alive because my grandkids live in Florida, and I haven't been able to subject them to all these stories. So I want to save them somehow.
No, that's a great benefit of these new technologies like that.
Yeah.
So can you take us back? So you mentioned you were sort of a straight edge guy, and then your friend turned you on to MDMA. So what pushed you over the edge? Was it just his suggestion? You trusted him, that kind of thing. And what was your experience initially with?
He's actually a lawyer, you know, and us lawyers are strange. Almost every lawyer I know wanted to quit his job. There are very few that really like the work. And he lives in Biloxi, Mississippi. And he called me one day and he says, "Have you heard of ecstasy?" And I says, "No, what's that?" And he says, "Well, it's ground zero, is Dallas, Texas. That's where it's hit the streets." And he says it's legal. And that's what got me. Had he not said it was legal, that would have been the end of the conversation. He says, "You ought to check it out." And I have a good friend of my wife at the time, was in that crowd. And so I had lunch with her, and I said, "Hey, how do I get a hold of some?" And she says, "Well, you shouldn't do it by yourself since you've never done anything." So, you know, she said, I have a date Friday night, but I have a friend. He can come over and he'll sit with you. Come over to my apartment, and you got to spend the night. You know, you can't go home, can't drive. And I said, "Okay." So I went over. Long story short, it changed my life. And I've helped, you know, hundreds of people on their initial experience with it. That the most common thing people say about MDMA is, "Oh, I felt like this once before." You know, it's not like this raving drug trip with everything's distorted. It's just the most pleasant summer day feeling of childhood, that kind of thing.
Right.
And once I did that, and then a week later, she took me to the Start Club in Dallas, which is it was described as Burning Man in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where house music came before it was in Chicago, or about the same time as Chicago. And so the Start Club was so popular, so big that Madonna moved to Dallas to be close to it. George W. Bush went there, and a lot of famous musicians. But anybody that had $10 could get into the door. It was a very strange place. Had one of the first chill spaces ever, and it was all techno music. So this was in the early '80s. So it was pretty new. Yeah, and there was just a scene. I said, hey, there's a lot of people in this world having a great time. I'm not one of them, and I became a druggie. What can I say?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting contrast when you talk about getting into trying those substances later in life, whereas myself, I may have tried them a little too early, like looking back, not that I regret it or whatever, and I'm at an okay place here in this time and place, but that is a problem, I think, and maybe that ties into the illegality of things, that younger people get a hold of these things in various ways that aren't the safest, and they can be mixed with things and all kinds of different like ecstasy pills were sort of famous for that. And then later came the more pure MDMA, which was apparently more safe and that kind of thing. But maybe we could talk about that a bit, the war on drugs and sort of the safety and the addiction properties of these things, and whether it's beneficial to really encourage people to try this stuff. Because, that's often a topic around this is both should people try it, how to get them to try it, whether they need to, is it beneficial and all that. I don't know what your thoughts are on all of that.
I don't think anybody should be talked into trying it or even suggested. I think people should desperately want to try it before you even, get close to it.
Right.
Like in the case of ayahuasca, which, when I first heard of it, it was being called yahe, and hardly anybody knew about it. It took me 10 years to make an ayahuasca connection. And, I was asking everybody everywhere. And all of a sudden it found me. And the same with acid and some of these other things. What's really good now that is different from when I first started in the '80s is there's so much information out there. When I got into it in I guess it was in '84, there was just no information. I went to the library, and the only thing I could find about drugs in the Dallas Public Library was the Castaneda's books, Carlos Castaneda's books about Don Juan. Okay. And I, since then, since living out here, I've met some people who were really closely associated with that. And Don Juan is a fictional character, a composite based on 3 or 4 people, but that whole thing, that was my drug education. And then I had a few people in town that I could get a hold of, but nobody knew what was going on. That's when Rick Doblin was first getting started. And Rick and I started a correspondence. That was about the only way I found things about MDMA medically. And that was before he started MAPS. So, there was just no information. And now people shouldn't get in trouble if they've done their research. There's no way you should take a substance until you've been to Arrowhead and you read about the substances there. And the only thing I suggest you do at Arrowhead is, if you are interested in a subject, you go look at that particular substance and read the bad trip reports. Don't read the good ones. If you can handle a good trip, but if you can't handle one of those bad trips, you should find something else. And quite frankly, cannabis is marijuana. Cannabis is changing so many things, particularly in old people like me. The fastest growing demographic population that's taking up cannabis for the first time are people over 60. And what it does is it allows them to get off of all these horrible meds that they're on. I'm almost 79 years old, and I don't take a single prescription medicine. I don't take any vitamins or supplements. I eat really well. I cook my own food and I exercise. And but for a while, about 7 or 8 years ago, my blood pressure got really high, and the doctor put me on this blood pressure medicine, and it was horrible. I was getting dizzy, and it just wasn't working. So instead, I went on a diet and lost between 30 and 35 pounds. And at the same time, we started testing CBD, 50-50 CBD THC, and got my blood pressure down. The weight was the big thing that got it down, but I'm not on any meds. And I have a friend who, well, he's actually Dr. Grove's brother, who is a geriatric doctor up in Northern California. And he's been able to get many of his patients off of their meds. And in some of the assisted living homes where he's been able to introduce medical marijuana, people's appetites have come back. They start playing cards, and it's really changing people's lives if you can get them off of these horrible prescription meds with all the side effects. That's what killed my dad.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it feels like I've seen various points of breakthrough in my life, especially in the last 10-20 years, as far as the acceptance of these things and the benefits of them. But it still feels like there's a major breakthrough, or a more mainstream breakthrough, that needs to happen, specifically with psychedelics and, say, MDMA, acid and mushrooms, and then those things. I sort of look at ayahuasca and DMT as sort of the next level after that, where really serious people, adventurers, might want to try. But I think that acid and mushrooms in particular are sort of relatively safe, easy to try, and in the right setting, and maybe a good of the lot. They may be the better ones if you're going to try one, again, in the right setting and all that. Now, some people look at these things as, you're just getting high, you're just having a good time, you just see funny colors and that kind of thing. And we often say that it's hard to put these experiences into words. And even those are words. So it's, how do you explain these things to people who've never tried it? Or do you ever bother to try that? Or is it more of a, your experience is yours, and they can have theirs when they have it?
Well, in the beginning, of course, I tried to describe my trips, and then after I started listening to other people's trips, I learned how boring it was. It's like a dream, unless you have to be
like
there.
Dream. Yes, nobody wants to hear somebody else's dream, somebody else's trip.
And so you really can't. And Terrence McKenna describes the two types of people as the psychedelic tourist that'll take a quarter of a tab of acid and say they're acid head. And then the guy who, like somebody going to France, and they change planes in the airport in Paris, and they say, I've been to France. And the other guy moves to France, marries a local, learns the language, teaches in the school. That guy's been to France, So it's the difference between a psychonaut and a psychedelic tourist. And the ayahuasca thing, you're right. It's the people who are more serious, but the big groups of people that are going to the jungle right now are a lot of military veterans. There's a number of military groups taking people down for PTSD work. MAPS now has their phase 3 study underway for MDMA and PTSD. And I know a number of people who have just had miraculous help with PTSD. There are major corporations now who have full-time positions teaching people how to microdose mushrooms and acid.
As far as PTSD goes, I mean, that's like risk-benefit analysis there tells you that if we've got these tools, we better use them, because PTSD is not, I don't experience that myself, but from what I glean, it's no joke. I mean, especially like you mentioned, veterans. I mean, the types of traumatic things that they've experienced in that, it doesn't, of course, it leads to suicide and different things. I mean, if their life is already going in such a bad direction, I mean, something, with these levels of safety, again, not to say that they're completely 100% safe, almost nothing is, but relatively speaking, and this is brought up many times, but we've got, alcohol is a ubiquitous substance, globally, and obviously many dangers with a substance like that. So,
well, with alcohol and LSD in the 50s and early 60s, there were somewhere around 3,000 papers written about curing alcoholism with PTSD. And up in Canada, they had at the clinics up there, they had something like 60 to 80% rate of curing people from alcoholism with LSD. Then, of course, all that research came to a halt. The same thing with mushrooms. They're now doing microdosing mushrooms, but the alcoholism and PTSD. There's a lot of ways that I think that eventually psychedelics are going to solve these problems or cure some. And PTSD isn't just for people who've been in the military. The rape victims are they have horrible lives. Some of them can never leave the house. And I did a podcast with a woman who had spent like 10, 12 years without leaving her house. She'd been raped as a child and like that. And she went through the MAPS program, and now she's appearing on CNN and traveling the country talking about. She actually tried to sign up for their follow-up study and didn't have any symptoms of PTSD, didn't qualify. So, there's our answers. And now that the big institutions are behind it again, the other thing is the FDA approval is coming so much faster because your generation and the one just ahead of you are taking over these positions now, and you're not so blinded like we are. So that's a generational thing as well.
That's an interesting phenomenon where the actual personnel who sort of run the world change, and along with it, they bring their, like you said, their sentiments from their generation, right? Like you said, access to information, all that. We're a little more rational when we look at these things, a little less susceptible to propaganda and things of the past, right?
Well, you have the internet, so you can actually disintermediate some of these media companies, and that doesn't mean you're gonna find out the truth all the time, but at least you can poke around and find different sides to a story,
Yeah, totally. That's totally true. So with Rick Doblin with the MAPS, what's the latest? Like we mentioned, Johns Hopkins is a center for psychedelic research. MAPS is a similar body, right? They just do strictly psychedelic research, or
MAPS was originally Rick actually went over to the World Health Organization in this must have been around 85 or 86. I've got a copy of the article, trying to get them to study MDMA for PTSD, among other things. So it has been his life's mission to get this done, to get it approved. And he's been a one-man band for a long time. He's literally raised millions of dollars. And MAPS doesn't do the research, but they sponsor the research. They sponsor the PhDs and the MDs and like that. And now they have this phase 3 study that's they have approval. Their therapists they've had approval to train their therapists by giving them MDMA, and that's something that hadn't been done before. Where if you're going to do LSD therapy and you've never taken LSD, well, you're not somebody I'd go to, So so they've really, it's the protocols that they've really put into place now. I'm a lawyer, so I can argue both sides of all these things. And I know that a lot of cities now are legalizing psilocybin, and there's these psilocybin, doctors that are popping up. Somebody will have a mushroom trip and think they're a psilocybin therapist. Well, there's a lot more to therapy than just taking a pill. And the reason MDMA has been pushed back by the pharmaceutical companies is because, like this woman who was totally cured of severe PTSD in her lifetime has now taken 3 120 milligram doses of MDMA. You can't keep selling the pills, but it's also with the therapist there. And the other thing about the therapy that they're doing that's unique is every therapy session has a man and a woman both. So you have a balance there, and you don't have any untold things. With MDMA, you can get into a love puddle and stuff like that if you're not careful. And so,
it's a strange, it does affect you in a strange, unique way. So that's interesting. The protocols have to be in place such that it makes it a comfortable, successful environment. Yeah.
And I had a lot of complaints about the FDA and all the approval process and all, but in talking with Rick has said that actually over the years, and Charlie Grove has told me the same thing, that the when they kick back these protocols and say, no, well, what about this? What about that? He said that they both said that the questions they've asked have really strengthened the protocols and made them much better. So that while it is a bureaucratic nightmare, it's moving faster, and we're making some progress. So I really think that by the time you're my age, it'll be like aspirin. You won't be talking about.
That's so interesting to think about, if that really will be the case. I mean, the other things they say about that is, when my group is your age, we'll have 20 extra years in our life expectancy, right? Because of medicine and that. And it's hard to imagine what the real outcomes will be. Will things just chug along and slowly move, or because even when the map stuff and first started coming out, I remember the initial perception was, okay, we've made it. Like, here we are. Like, this is the next level. Whereas there's just still research to be done, and it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. But that will be interesting to see if it does become more prevalent.
Well, the other issue that's coming out now that is not a happy one is the commercialization of all this. Some big businesses. Look what's happening in cannabis. Marijuana has become a mess. And there's some huge companies, and now the tobacco companies are getting into marijuana farming, and the same thing. I was against the legalization Proposition 64 here in California because of all the regulations, but and they are very onerous. But the cannabis I get now, first of all, I go out to a website and I order it with my credit card, and it's delivered the next morning to my door. Okay,
yeah,
and I have
convenient. Yeah,
I have a range of hundreds and hundreds of choices. And so that's something I never dreamt was possible, because I used to drive down to, a part of town I didn't like, and I come home with this ragweed, and I have to separate all the, get the seeds out and everything. And so that has changed so dramatically. The other thing that I'm aware of, because I've been doing this for, the last 16 years, is people are so freely speaking about psychedelics. When I first started, one of my dreams was that people could go around the water cooler at work and talk about psychedelics. It'd be mainstream enough. The guy I went to Palenque with, a guy I worked with, we had lunch together every day for maybe half a year or more before we admitted to one another that we smoked pot. And that's how subdued everything, subversive things were. It was horrible. And so things have changed dramatically. Now, are they going to keep changing like that? Well, when I was growing up, Dick Tracy two-way wrist radio in the comic books was fantasy, and none of us, we all wanted one, but none of us believed we would ever really have something like that. So here we are,
anything's possible. And like you said, if the history is any trajectory, indication of the trajectory, that's very, very possible.
That 50 years from now is impossible. You can't predict 5 years from now, let alone 5 months from now. So
that's true.
This we're on a wave, and all you can do is keep your balance. Don't let it crash over you.
Yeah, there's a couple friends of mine that in my head, I tell myself it's my life goal to get them to try, say, mushrooms once, because they're such smart guys and interesting guys that you just know if they took that thing, they something would click, and they just have these great insights. Not that they don't have great insights right now, but you just want to sometimes see the potential of some people with that little added extra boost. So back to sort of the language we use to describe it, I find myself in these long conversations on occasion with these few individuals, and I think I'm getting there. I'm sort of cracking them, but people have apprehensions about these things, but they're intrigued.
But the misinformation we pick up as children sticks with us a lot longer than we realize. That my friend that turned me on to MDMA, who lives in Mississippi, and I used to supply him with MDMA, and he and I smoked a lot of pot together. He has never tried LSD or anything but MDMA and pot. He is terrified of trying LSD because he thinks he would lose his mind and go insane. Yeah. So I understand where your friends are coming from. And in fact, I was there. My first acid trip was after I'd moved to Florida. I'd had this window pane somebody had given me, and I'd never tried it yet. So one day I told my now ex-wife, I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And she was going to wait out. We had a 2-story house. I was going to do it upstairs in the bedroom. She was waiting outside. And I said, it's going to be a long time. And we both talked about the fact I may never come back. This may be it. I may, we really believe that was a possibility. Yeah. But I just wanted to do it so badly that I did it. And until you get that kind of a desire, you're wasting your breath telling your friends.
That's a good point. It's a very good point. So maybe I just need to chill on.
I would if I were you.
Yeah. But me myself as well. I've had a couple bad trips, and even some that were just so strange that I sort of had what they call a flashback, but I don't know if it was, the substance was still in my brain or however they try to define flashbacks. For me, it was these odd sort of, I'd be watching a movie and something in the script of the movie would relate conceptually to the experience that I had, whether it's about duality or some concept. And that sort of thing in the movie would trigger me into that mindset again. Not really a sort of like, I think when people think of flashbacks, they think, oh, you get, the colors get crazy and you get dizzy or something like that. No, not really. It's more of a reminding, like the casting of a stone, or what do they call it when you skip a stone across the water, right? That, to me, that's what it's sort of, I don't know if that does it any justice.
It's sort of, what you're describing sounds more like deja vu.
In a sense, yeah, it was very much like a deja vu, and I call that my flashback, just because maybe I haven't experienced the typical flashback that people have. But yeah, that was a very strange thing for me, and I remember specifically, I had them a couple times. So I told myself I was going to quit smoking weed, because I think a couple of them happened when I was smoking weed, and then sure enough, I had them when I was sober. So that was like a case study for myself, that I was like, hey, this is there's something very peculiar about this, because I've quit the substances and I'm still getting this sort of repetition of my experience. So those things and other things, people listening, if they've had those experiences, they'll kind of know what we're talking about, and some might not. But yeah, again, just very out of this world type of things can happen.
I can't relate to it. And, I've done literally hundreds of acid trips, several hundred, and some over 1,000 mics. I've never once had a flashback. And several of us now, we're trying to get away from saying we had a bad trip and say we had difficult trips.
Yes.
I've seen people that have had bad trips, and I've never had one of them. I've had some really challenging and difficult trips, but I remember this one guy had this horrible trip. And it was actually an ayahuasca where he was just screaming. We had to take him out of the house, and he was just screaming, and it was just horrible. And the next morning in our circle, he's describing he had this crown of thorns, and thorns coming out of his eyes, and his flesh being ripped off, and then all of a sudden his face turns very blissful, and he says, it was the most incredible, wonderful experience of my life. I thought, oh, fuck me.
Yeah.
No, thank you. No,
right.
Thank you.
Well, that's another interesting thing. And I try to explain this as well to people, that the challenging trips, even though they have negative aspects to them, for some strange reason, there's something, like you said, blissful about them, or there's always a lesson to be learned or something. Had a weird thing about a year ago, where my fiance and I were hanging out watching a movie, and I had one THC pill that someone had given me. Now, we've tried this same batch of pills. They were very mild doses. Some of our friends have had 2 or 3 at once. It wasn't like a special pill, or I don't think it was. Took one of those and had a very odd reaction where I sort of was shaking. My body was sort of convulsing, like, and again, this is not ayahuasca or psychedelic. This is just a THC pill, a run-of-the-mill thing. Can't really explain it, but she says that was one of the scariest times ever. She had to calm me down. But I look back at it, and she kind of hit me in the side, because I'll say, like, I loved it so much. It was such a great experience. She's like, no, it wasn't. You were shaking. You were convulsing. Like you were not having a good time. But I have this, perspective of, no, it was like amazing. Like I went to heaven and I saw God and in this span of 30 minutes on this THC pill. I don't know why, because again, I occasionally smoke marijuana and these things, and this was just a average pill, but I don't know why it hit me hard that day. And
that doesn't sound average. It sounds like an adulterated pill to me.
Now, who knows why the combination?
What your biochemistry, your metabolism, set and setting, music that was on, that there's all these things. But I would get a different brand next time.
Yeah. Well, I still have. I think I have one of them here, and as a joke, I always say, one day I'll try it again. And she goes, "You better not." But yeah, it's again,
just don't give it to anybody.
No. And again, it just speaks to the sort of you don't always know what you're going to get, and that
right.
kind of thing.
Oh, that's true. That's very true. And if with psychedelics, if you are not scared shitless going into your next experience, then you're not doing it right. And people, I have over 300 Terrence McKenna podcasts or talks on my show, so I've heard a lot of them. And what people don't realize about Terrence McKenna is he said, he does 1 or 2 or maybe 3 big psychedelic trips a year. He wasn't doing psychedelics all week long and everything like that. And most of the people who really do it to get something out of it intellectually, spiritually, however you want to define it, are people who do it occasionally, but they do it right. They have the right setting. They've been working on their mindset for a while. They've got the phone off the hook, things like this. So it's not a matter of just going crazy all the time. I remember one time at a conference, somebody came up to one of the speakers afterwards, and she was a young girl, and she had multicolored hair and piercings all over, and she just couldn't stop moving. She was just going crazy, and she asked this guy, she said, "How come my parents won't try psychedelics?" And he said, "Because they're afraid they'll turn out like you."
Yeah. So that's very true. That's very true. I've found with the most recent time, me and my fiance did LSD. It was a half a tab, and I found I was worried it wasn't going to be enough, because in high school days and that, I remember 1 or 2 was or if 3 if you want to get really crazy. But yeah, we did a half, and I was like, you know what, it was just a perfect. It's like a 6-pack of beer. It's like 3 or 4 beers instead of a 2-4. Of a 9% beer. Like you've got to watch the doses and the set and setting. And what she says, that was the greatest day of her life.
That's a little bit more than a microdose, but yes. I know what you mean, because when I the last 6 months of working on the Spirit of the Internet, when I was writing that, I was microdosing, and what I found is that your concentration expands. You have a wider range. It's like if you're a programmer, you can keep 5 subroutines in your mind at the same time, knowing how they're interacting with one another. And that's microdosing. If you're a computer programmer or a writer or an artist, can be very beneficial once you learn how to do it. You don't want to start out just microdosing. You want to know something about the substance and your relation to it and how you react with it and all too. But over time, that's going to be taught in schools. It's being taught in corporate workshops right now.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Jumping back to Terrence McKenna, what are some more of the, because he's such a fascinating guy to me, always has been, obviously eloquent with his words, and his experience is vast. He was an ethnobotanist, he was many things. I'm sure he was self-taught in various subjects, and interested in things like the I Ching and all of these. He always had some reference to some ancient book or something you'd never heard of that he was privy to, and of course his brother Dennis does a lot of great work too. But what are some of the most interesting things that you sort of learned from him or through his talks? You mentioned you have so many on your podcast there.
Well, Terrence, first of all, he tried to make sure people didn't take him too seriously. That how he really became popular back in the late 70s and early 80s is he was going around to living rooms and he was talking about psychedelics. Nobody else was talking about it. There was no literature. There's no way to find it. And then he and Dennis, wrote the Mushroom Grower's Guide, and that's what really broke mushroom growing open. And so he would go around, and the only way you could find out about a lot of these things was to get a bootleg tape of one of Terrence's talks. And that's how he became so popular. Then it was in 1983, at UC Santa Barbara. There was a psychedelic conference there that had Richard Evans Schultes, Albert Hoffman, all the big names there. And my wife, the woman who's my wife now, was there with a friend of ours who's a doctor. That was her boyfriend at the time. And they were at that conference, and they were there, and it was Richard Evans Schultes and Hoffman and everything. And toward the end of the conference, the organizer got out and says, so-and-so couldn't make it, the plane didn't make it or something. So we've got a last term fill in here, but I think you're going to like this guy, Terrence McKenna. Nobody remembered anything from the conference except Terrence's talk. Wow, yeah. The people I've been to. Now, in my podcast number 100, I podcast that talk and also the talk that day that Sasha Shulgin gave. And that talk was very important to me because when I first started doing MDMA, when I started dealing it, the guy that got me involved gave me this literature to read. So I would, what little literature there was, and it was a literally mimeograph copy of Shulgin's talk at that thing. And that was the only psychedelic literature I had my hands on at the time. So those two talks are really important to me. And Terrence really just, he didn't give too many organized lectures. His talks were all, people would ask questions, then he'd go off. He had the most brilliant mind and memory. He could quote books and obscure authors. He read everything he could get his hands on and remembered it. And that was the big thing. And, he changed a lot of his opinions like we all do throughout life. And so people sometimes will say, well, Terrence said this, but maybe 5 years later he changed his mind. But he also could be a really funny guy. Yeah. One of my favorite stories is when he was in charge of a house of people renting at Berkeley when he was a student there. And it was vacation, Christmas vacation. Everybody went home or Thanksgiving or something. And he was there by himself, I think. And he decided to do some acid. And I can't remember how the whole story evolved, but something went wrong. Somebody was with him, went wrong and got sick, and they had to call 911. I can't remember exactly, but the police go down to the front door and it was locked. And he's on the other side of the door and they're saying, open the door. And he couldn't get it unlocked. And he's just totally fucked up. And he says, I'm standing aside, shoot the lockout. Yeah. And so I can just see him doing this, that he had a lot of funny stories too, but basically he was just an encyclopedia of knowledge before Arrowwood came around,
Oh yeah. I was going to say something about, and it's unfortunate his time was short-lived. When he passed away, was it before the millennium that he even passed?
It was in April of 2000.
Right. So he just made it to the millennium. But yeah, he just obviously seemed ahead of his time. But the specifically, you mentioned earlier the .com bubble and that time period was very interesting for a guy like him to come around and talk about the things he was talking about, because it went very deep, like into the psyche, into the self and society and technology and how we integrate with technology. It was just sort of a perfect whirlwind scenario there for him. Yeah, he was.
He was really into science and technology. He read Scientific American faithfully, and read a lot of the manuals. And when the World Wide Web came out, it just blew him away, because what he was, he would travel, from Hawaii. He'd fly to New York and give a weekend workshop for 60 people. And, it's not energy efficient. It wasn't efficient for him, And so he started working with Bruce Damer, and they were going to try to make all of his workshops like what we're doing here, Zoom type things. And actually, Bruce was over there, and they did the first with Terrence online I can't remember the name of the technology they're using. And that was just a few weeks before he had a seizure and it all ended. But Terrence wanted to get off the road and start doing things from a technological perspective instead. So he just saw the potential of getting people connected. And you've probably heard his story about his ultimate fantasy is that one day we'd all be living naked in the rainforest, and we'd pick up a flower and we'd smell it and we'd shut our eyes and the lids would come down and we would be transported into a concert hall in Paris for an opera, stuff like that. And that was his dream of technology. But like you say, he also had the whole deep psychedelic thing in because, that was his DMT was his big thing as a young college student. And, he was doing DMT for a decade before I heard even the acronym.
Yeah, no, and like you said too, people may dismiss him if they just hear certain parts of what he said, or he did make certain predictions that may not have come true and that kind of thing, with whether it's time wave zero or specific dates and things like that. But I think that psychedelics, I consider him a genius still, but psychedelics can also make us, even for a smart person, go down these strange pathways of imagination and making up theories and stuff. But I think a lot of what he said was important. And it is subtle stuff, though. It's hard, even if you listen to hours of his lectures, sometimes it's hard to grasp. Okay, what is he really talking about? He reminds me of Krishnamurti in that way, where just they have very simple, subtle things that they're saying, but the way that the metaphors and the way that they're explaining them are very intricate and in depth. And so if you're not paying enough attention, or if you're trying to add in your own concepts and theories over top of what they're saying, it gets muddied and confusing. But and I don't know if you know that comparison at all. I just feel, for me, he's very much like a Krishnamurti figure. Krishnamurti talked about truth in action and sort of raw basic concepts like that, relationship, about two people meeting each other but not fully meeting because you're always meeting an image of them, different things like that people, if they first listen, and go, what the heck are these guys talking about? But does that make any sense at all?
Krishnamurti is a good example too. It's like they're trying to carve a statue out of jello, and it's just keeps morphing a little bit.
Right.
But I can't speak for Krishnamurti, but Terrence, his whole concept was to get people thinking about the shape that he's trying to make, but not focus on the shape, but to use their own hands to make that shape.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that. Huh?
Yeah. He wasn't a dogmatist. He didn't really want people following him. He just wanted people to start thinking for themselves and questioning authority, like Tim Leary said years earlier. So I think that he just wanted people to wake up and start paying attention to what's going on.
Totally. And I think he did that for me. Guys like him. And you've interviewed Ram Dass on occasion. Is that true?
I didn't interview him. I've met Ram Dass, and but I didn't interview him. I played a talk that he gave, a couple talks, I guess, that he's given. But
for people who don't know Ram Dass, what do you think is some of the most important things that he said about?
Well, how did he say? That the way to paraphrase Ram Dass is, wherever you are, be there.
Yeah. Now, is that again, people who maybe are adverse to the woo-woo spiritual stuff would kind of dismiss those things, like the Eckhart Tolle thing about be here now and all that, as sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but too basic of a concept. What do you think that means?
But that wherever you are, be there. Right now, if you are, say you're in a restaurant and there's some casual talk going on, and you might be thinking about something you're going to do later in the day, you are not there in the restaurant. Right. Or wherever you are. And the older I get, the more difficult it is. My concentration powers are getting weaker. The upside of that is that it makes me stand up and walk around more often. So, yeah. But yeah, I think that, well, you hit on it earlier when you're talking about it's very difficult to talk about some of these things. So some of them are ineffable. And, Sasha Shulgin has a rating scale about psychedelics, 1 to 5. And a 1 is something, and that's how he always started. He always started with just tiny microdoses with, he invented all these new substances. So he'd work his way up. And when he got a first little tingle, if he got no tingle, there was no psychedelic activity. But got a little tingle, that was a 1. All the way up to a 5 is a +5 experience, is one of those things where you come back and you say, I don't know why I know this, but everything's perfect. The world is fine. It's glorious. I can't tell you a thing about the trip, though. That's a plus. Totally ineffable. A +4 is where you're in and out a little bit of that. You can bring a few things back. A +2 is something that, okay, I'm in psychedelics now, but beware the dreaded underdose. To me, you do the work at a +3. Because that's where you have an intention. You're not getting so far out that you're going to lose everything, but you're getting far enough in that you're going to have to do some difficult work, or you're going to have some great joy, both of them probably. But when people say they want a heroic dose, to me, a heroic dose is a +3 trip where you have to do the work.
Yeah, it can be a daunting task, that's for sure. You mentioned, so we talk about this be here now type concept. Obviously today we're dealing with this epidemic of the phones, the cell phones. The companies behind them are developing these algorithms to keep our attention. First thing we do when we wake up in the morning is we check them because we're addicted to the news cycle. We want to see what's next. So we grab our phones to see what's in the news and what are people saying and that kind of thing. So like, I sound like a boomer or whatever that's talking about these dang kids and their technology. I mean, I'm a victim of it too, but we all use them in our business. Like I'm a DJ as well, so I have to stay in tune with the events that are going on and different things. So you almost can't get away from it. But do we just have to continue sort of synergistically living with this stuff? Or do you think there's going to be a sort of overhaul of the system maybe where we change things? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, if I could answer that question, I could get rich, I think.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I can argue both sides of that. I only got a cell phone 3 years ago. I didn't really need one. That my wife has one and like that, and so I didn't need one. And then I got one, and now I don't want to be without it. But I make a real studied point of not getting out when I'm outside of the house, on a walk or something. I get it out when I want to do something with it, but I take it because it counts my steps. I like that, so I take it on my walk with me. But I keep it in airplane mode so nobody can call me and interrupt me. And I sometimes will take a 3 or 4 day technology break where I don't turn my computer on. Now, you can't do that. Younger people can't do that. People involved in the business world can't do that. But any way that you can take a break from technology, I think is going to be good for you. And like what happened to me a couple of weeks ago, my computer crashed, and I didn't back up everything. Unlike most people, I know they back everything up all the time, but I didn't have everything backed up. And one thing I didn't have backed up, for example, was all my bookmarks. And now I only have like 5 or 6 bookmarks, and I'm making a point of not getting more bookmarks. It's cleaned me up a little bit. I changed my operating system. I've been using Ubuntu for like 6-7 years, but I changed to MX Linux and the Brave browser, and it's like DOS. It just snaps. It's so fast and secure. And so I've really streamlined down my technology to where I no longer feel like I'm burdened by it, and I can just go out and use it for what I want and then get away from it. Now, I couldn't do what I'm doing right now without technology. I'm writing a book about the 50s now, and I'm constantly researching things. I'd have to be living in a library otherwise. So,
right.
It's very good as long as you don't let it get a hold of you.
Yeah. So I guess it's, technology it's going to keep going. There's no change. The only constant is change. And so we're just dealing with this change. But I think that you're right. And you see that more often, people taking breaks, whether it's from specific social media sites, like a Twitter break for a month or whatever it is. But that is important, I think, for my generation and the ones to come after, because, or maybe it'll just, I don't know what I'm talking about. And we're just going to really become that hologram thing that Terrence McKenna was sort of.
But you really need to pay attention to what's happening in your own life, I think. For example, I was on Facebook. It's been at least 7 or 8 years since I got off Facebook, maybe even more. I had over 3,000 friends on Facebook.
Right.
And I know it's changed a lot since then, but at the time, people could tag you in a picture, even if you weren't in a picture. And all of a sudden, all of these crazy psychedelic parties and pictures were showing up that my name was tagged to them. And I thought, I don't have any control over this. So I just went cold turkey and dropped Facebook. And I've lost contact with most of my family that way because they refuse to talk to me other than on Facebook. But
well, they're lost.
Yeah, but I decided that I didn't want to, and I was getting into that where, oh, I got another friend, and wait a minute, I don't know 3,000 people, and I was paying attention to their lives, and hell, I've got enough going on in my own life. I don't need to pay attention to all that.
Yeah, I think we do need to normalize, like, it's okay to not have social media or to get off of there. When I mentioned the business world, I'm of a split mind on it because I argue with myself. I say, I don't like this. I want to take a break from it. I say, well, what if I'm going to miss out on a gig because someone's trying to contact me, or, you just kind of convince yourself that, but that's, to me, and I'm not a cigarette smoker, but I could imagine it's something like the addiction to cigarettes where it's like, do you really need that thing? It's just a habit. You're convincing yourself you need it. And you do have the power to quit cold turkey because people do it. I know they say it's a hard thing to quit, but I don't know, maybe the self-discipline needs to be more understood, or it is a tool that we really can use to overcome these algorithms and things that have seemed to taken control of us.
Yeah, and the AI algorithms are something that we can have another conversation sometime about that, because that's first of all, I'll just plant the seed. Most of the AI technology is being developed right now is being developed by young men under 30. So there's some prejudice coming in there. And they're all races. They're various races, but they're young and they're mainly male. And these algorithms are going to be controlling a lot of our lives.
It's crazy stuff. Lorenzo, I want to thank you for taking the time again to join us here on the podcast. And we've learned a lot. We've covered a lot of stuff. The podcast is Psychedelic Salon. It's available most everywhere. And is there anywhere else people can follow you on social media and that kind of thing?
No, just psychedelicsalon.com. That's where I try to focus everything. And there's no ads on it, no Google AdWords or anything like that. It's I've had friends from EFF help me, and it doesn't track you unless you leave a comment, and I approve all the comments or I disapprove the comments. So it's a pretty safe site to go to if you don't want to be tracked.
Very cool. Well, it's been nice to meet you, and hopefully we can do this again one day. And thanks again.
Yeah, and we'll come back and talk about AI someday.
Sounds perfect to me. All right.
Be well.
Okay, you too.